In the past few weeks, you've probably heard something about exclusive podcasts on Spotify, likely in the context of this guy. And look, exclusive podcasts on Spotify suck, but not just because of Joe Rogan. It's a much deeper issue, and we've been talking about it for a lot longer than he's been on the platform. But if you don't know me, my name's Matt, and I'm an engineer, I'm a musician, and I actually made a podcast for a couple years. But here on YouTube, I make videos about tech, games, music technology, and whatever gets me excited at the time. I hope that you'll enjoy this one. Also, at the end of this video, I have a very relevant announcement. So for the 150 or so of you that I know watch all of my videos, 1, thank you. And 2, you're gonna wanna stick around. So on October 24th, 2021, Hank Green, musician, YouTuber, TikTok science dad, science communicator, he probably likes that one. Hank Green tweeted, "It occurs to me that podcasts are the last large-scale, non-centralized internet media." And his replies were full of people saying, not if Spotify has anything to say about it. Just 3 days earlier, on October 1st, Jeff Emtman, creator and host of the podcast Here Be Monsters, tweeted, "Don't listen to podcasts if they're only available in one app. Don't reward this trend." Now, Jeff's tweet didn't blow up, but it did start some capital D discourse. Podcast Twitter was all over it, either subtweeting Jeff and people who think like him, or backing up his opinion. The podcast Heavyweight announced that it would be going exclusive to Spotify on September 30th of 2021. Heavyweight is a podcast from Gimlet Media, which started as a small podcast startup, but is now a division of Spotify. It is 0% coincidence that Jeff tweeted what he did on October 1st. It's very clearly a response to the Heavyweight news. And frankly, it's not surprising that his tweet caused all the drama that it did. My guess is that if you don't consume media about podcasts instead of just listening to them, that maybe, you think, what's the big deal with exclusive Spotify podcasts? Or maybe you think that Jeff was so right in tweeting the spicy thing that he did. In either case, thank you for meeting my imagination so perfectly. I'm happily going to answer those questions for you. So something big happened in podcasts in 2014, and it was so huge that I'm betting that milliseconds into this next music cue, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If any given person told you that they listened to a podcast in 2014, it was likely that they were talking about Serial. Serial, in my view, was the first mainstream breakout podcast, and a lot of that has to do with its premise. It's a story from the producers of This American Life told, as they say it, week by week, which is not revolutionary, but for podcasts at the time was unique. It's a story about compelling people with a genuine mystery, and it's the reason that there's 80 million true crime podcasts now. But I don't think Serial's success was inevitable, at least not to the level that it eventually reached. I and a lot of people in the industry believe that Serial was just the inevitable big hit show after Apple decided to move podcasts into its own default app on the iPhone and out of the music app. It made podcasts more discoverable. And discovery, discoverability, these are words podcast people use all the time, and really they just mean that they want people to be able to find and listen to their podcast. The breaking out of the podcast app on the iPhone was the biggest jump in discovery that podcasts as a medium had had since 2005. I don't want to get into a deep technical explanation of how podcasts work in the back end, but I do think it's important for you to understand where they came from. You see, podcasts started around 2003, and back then, the web was still in a state where these big platforms like Facebook and Google really didn't have a hold on the internet like they do now. It was still very common to run into a website that was run by a single person. And most of the time, that website was a blog filled with just things that person had written. And people would have several blogs that they wanted to follow, and they would want a way to collect all of that content in a single place. And this is how RSS was born. Again, I'm not going to go into a deep technical explanation of what RSS is and how it works, but it is essentially a text file that lists the blog post from your blog that an app or another service or whatever can subscribe to and import that content into. Eventually, people wanted to go beyond writing text for these posts. Maybe they wanted these posts to be audio or video. And people thought, well, we could expand RSS to support that too. And these RSS readers could pull in these audio or video files. That was the beginning of podcasts. People had essentially invented a distributed way to broadcast media files. People chose the word podcast seemingly because at the time the iPod was the big hot tech gadget, and that's often how people listen to these things. And unfortunately, that is the word that we're stuck with. So that's how podcasts were born. People started making these audio shows and distributing them over these RSS feeds, these podcast feeds. At first, it was the bloggers, and then it was the comedians, and then eventually the public radio stations got in there, first by, rebroadcasting the things that they put on the radio, and then by making internet-specific shows. And at the beginning, a lot of these creators were no names, and a lot of the audiences were small. Some of those audiences grew, some of the bigger names got involved, but the important thing was that anyone could do it. That's always been the atmosphere and the reality of podcasting. But one of the difficulties in this early time was finding these podcasts, these feeds, or getting people to find your podcast. I told you we were going to talk a lot about discovery. You see, at first there were these podcatcher applications. That's what they called them for a time, but they were essentially like desktop apps that you could install, and they would point at RSS feeds and just download the new episodes as they came out. That was how people listened to podcasts for a while. They would find an individual feed, plug it into their podcatcher, and it would just download new episodes. You might put them into your iTunes, put them on your iPod, and listen to them on the go, but it was a very manual process. And then in 2005, Apple decided to join the fray. And they did it in an interesting way that I frankly think they might not do today. They decided to create a directory of podcast feeds. They didn't do this by asking people for their feeds and then downloading all of the audio and video files and then redistributing those episodes to users. We'll get back to that one. No, they decided that instead of doing that, they'd ask people for their feeds, but then they would point users to those feeds. It's a nice kind of hands-off approach that lists all of these feeds in a way that is, searchable and easy to find new shows, but then just points you to the people that host those shows and lets you kind of have a relationship with them. And for the longest time, Apple owned podcasting because no one touched it, including Apple, between 2005 and 2014. This is how podcasts were for 9 years. Now, there were some changes. In that time, smartphones became popular. So instead of podcatchers, we were using podcast apps. And a lot of those built in directories similar to Apple's. But something a lot of people don't know is a lot of those directories are built on Apple's directory. Apple provides an API that is built on top of their directory, and a lot of early podcast apps just use that API instead of building their own. And this is how it was for 9 years. Apple basically owned the back end of podcasting, but in a way that didn't harm relationships between creators and listeners. And then in 2014, like I said, the breaking out of the podcast app on the iPhone was the biggest jump in discovery that podcasts as a medium had had since 2005. And for a while there, I couldn't scroll through my Facebook feed without someone telling me how they discovered podcasts for the first time and how they couldn't believe all of this was free. Meanwhile, I'd been manually downloading and syncing episodes of This Week in Tech, Mac Break Weekly, Buzz Out Loud, Techzilla, The Totally Rad Show, and putting them on my Microsoft Zune to listen to as I went to school in the morning since 2006. Clearly, I'm a big fan of podcasts. I had that early tech podcast obsession, and then I got really into This American Life and Radiolab, and then in 2014, I was there obsessed with Serial with everyone else, but that's when my obsession with the medium really exploded. At one point, Pocket Cast, the app that I used, told me I was subscribed to 88 shows. 99% Invisible was an always listen. In 2015, I started listening to the beginning of the new, at the time, Dear Hank and John podcast, and I've listened to every episode since. It's really the first time that I felt like I've been a part of a Green Brothers thing from the beginning. I also got really into the various offerings from early Gimlet Media, Reply All, Startup, and later Science Versus and Heavyweight. Those are some of my favorite shows. And Startup actually got me interested in Gimlet Media as a company, which, got me to join their membership program, including their member Slack. And the people that I met there, despite the fact that Gimlet unceremoniously shut down that member Slack a year ago, the people I met there are still some of my closest friends. Now, Gimlet formed in this time, but so did a ton of other companies, because there was just money pouring in. And when all of these companies were forming, when all of this hype and excitement was happening, that's when Spotify entered the picture. In 2015, Spotify announced that they would be expanding beyond music into video and podcasts. And the reason that they did that is because streaming music as a business is expensive. If you're an old school subscriber to this channel, then you might remember this video, which was about music rights and streaming on Twitch. And the thing about music rights is that they're extremely complicated and they're very expensive to acquire. There's a big conversation to be had about Spotify paying artists more fairly, but one of the reasons they don't want to is because those rights are already expensive to begin with. I want to be clear here, Spotify should be paying artists far more than they are now, but as a business, this is why they don't want to. Spotify's business model sits right in the center of some really complicated and messed up music rights shenanigans. Every time that you stream a song on Spotify, Spotify has to pay a bunch of people. They have to pay the person that sung the song, the person that wrote the song, the people that signed a contract from the person that wrote the song, and the people that signed a contract with the people that wrote the song, and the person that was performing the marimba on the song. There's so many people that have to get paid out, and somebody has to keep track of that, right? And all of those people have to get paid fairly. And what that means for Spotify and for your use of the platform is that every minute you spend in Spotify listening to music is a minute that Spotify has to spend money. So if they can get you to listen to a podcast instead, that's free money to them. They might get your subscription or your ad dollars and then have no cost on the other end, except for, the nominal cost up front to acquire that podcast. The more they can shift your time in the app towards listening to podcasts, the better it is for them, for their business. And they sure are planning to help you do that. I was weirdly excited about podcasts and Spotify, but I would learn my lesson pretty quick. It took them a really long time to launch video and kind of flopped. It was not a good feature. And then they launched podcasts and it was equally not good, maybe worse, but they didn't want to let it die. I think for the reasons that I said before. It's just too financially good for them. But the ways that it wasn't good were interesting. We could talk about the user experience, but first, a lot of people in podcasting were really upset when podcasts launched on the platform. You see, up till now, everyone had been operating this model where listeners' apps might be getting their podcast feeds from Apple, like the link to those feeds, but they were still getting their audio from the creators themselves. Spotify, when they get your feed, downloads each new episodes to their servers, and then in their own proprietary, locked down way, sends those audio files through their application to their users. That connection, that direct connection between creator and listener is no longer there. This redistribution pissed a lot of people off, me included. It's not a way that I think podcasting should work. It breaks a lot of the open nature of podcasting, and it threatens a lot of what's good currently about podcasting. And the thing is, whether or not Spotify's been a good steward of that relationship is really up for debate. Their user experience, both for the listener and creator, has been iffy. It's gotten better over time, but it's still pretty lacking in my opinion. Due to their more closed nature, they can offer certain things that more open platforms can't. In a more open platform, you can't get everyone to agree on certain RSS features, for example. However, they're still really lacking some basic podcast app functionality. I want to talk about the good and the bad of podcasts on Spotify. Here's a few things that I think are actually pretty good about the podcast experience on Spotify. Number one, being able to put licensed music in shows is incredible for creators. There's now shows on Spotify that are obviously Spotify exclusive, but because they've done all of the work around rights management, I can, put a song from Spotify in my show, talk about it, not have to worry about all those rights. And because it's on that platform, they handle all of that for me. That's a really cool thing. I wish that there was a way to do that in a more open nature, but it's nice that it exists. Things that people have wanted for a really long time is more interactivity with podcasts. Things like quizzes, polls, surveys, images, stories. Those things exist in Spotify. Now, if you don't know this, MP3 has chapter markers, and in most podcast apps, you can attach an image to a chapter marker and it will show you that image. So images are not new, but the other stuff is, and that exists in the Spotify app, and that's good, both for the user and the creator. I think that's a good feature. And because they use an app and have a little bit more data, they're able to provide the creator with more detailed analytics analytics. Like, Spotify's really good at analytics. They tell you what other shows your listeners have been listening to, what music they're listening to. That stuff is interesting and can help creators make better shows. If you make a podcast that is just distributed over RSS, you really only get like location and downloads. Some platforms provide a little bit more, but I think that this is good. Getting this data is better. We can have a conversation about data privacy, but I think that this is a net good. They also bought a company that I really enjoy called Anchor, and their whole goal is to make podcast creation as simple as possible. I think everything that Anchor does is super great. Well, maybe not their distribution stuff. They're making it really easy to distribute. I think I have some questions about like ownership and stuff like that, but I really like Anchor on the whole. I also think just like the benefit of having Spotify Connect, their like API that lets you kind of listen to anything on Spotify on any Spotify connected device, is just good from a user experience overall. This is not podcast specific. It's like also in the music experience and stuff like that, but having that tied to podcasts is a really, really clever thing. And when I've used the app for shows in the past, I have thought that that was a really good feature. I also think because of the network effects, and when I say that, I just mean that like a lot of people use Spotify, being able to share shows on Spotify it's good. A lot of people use Spotify. So I can, if I want to share a show, I can easily share that. I don't have to find some service like Podlink. However, Podlink's great and you should use it if you are committed to open podcasting like I am. But I don't have to like go searching and find out how to share a link for a podcast with my friend. Just going back to the old standards, discovery. I think that they're doing a really good job of getting people's shows in the ears of new listeners. I think also the ad network that they provide to people is really important so that, people want to make this their job, they can do that. I think people should be making money on the things that they create. I think that's really effective. Now, let's get to the bad. We've already talked about one of these. I think re-hosting the content is the original sin. One thing it does is it breaks download analytics. If you like host a podcast in a really traditional way, you have to go to Spotify to get your Spotify analytics and then go to your hosting platform to get your other analytics. I don't know if they fixed that in the meantime, but that's how it was when I ran a podcast for a couple years. I find that to be so broken, and it is the kind of thing that leads people to be like, oh, I'll just use Spotify. Also, you get extra ads on the free tier. And as a creator, I don't want Spotify to be inserting ads into or around my show. I think there's ways to get around that, like around like paying me, and I don't really know how that goes, but like just the idea that they're doing that, and for you, the listener, the idea that you have to listen to ads that are like not in the show around it, like when you could just be listening to it in a regular podcast app, and I don't know, you can skip over the ads that are built into the show if you want to. Just like the extra ad things drives me nuts. There was another company called Luminary who got in big trouble for this like 3 or 4 years ago and had to like do this big apology tour. And I just don't know why people are not mad at Spotify for this one. They also still don't support putting in your own RSS feed for, things like paid podcasts, or maybe just like a random RSS feed you found that, you want to put in there because it's not on the platform. I know that recently they've added these buttons where you can authenticate to a member platform, get a paid podcast into your Spotify app that way. Last I heard, Patreon's still not on there. And I know that that is one of the main ways that people monetize these paid podcasts. And I also just think like, just give me a box to put a link into. Also, last time I checked, chapters were still completely absent. A lot of people don't even know like podcast chapters exist, but most open podcast apps support them. I think the Apple Podcast app does. I know Overcast on iOS does. I know Pocket Cast on both Android and iOS does. I think Podcast Addict on Android does as well. They enable some really great stuff like skipping chapters buttons, like having names so that I know like what the chapter is named so I know what's coming next. I told you earlier you can show images on a specific chapter. A lot of my favorite shows get a lot of use out of chapters. And I find them really useful. They have some audio tweaking features, including like some speed controls that are kind of limited, but I don't use these features, but I know a lot of people do. And theirs are very, very limited, and I think they could do a lot better. One of the things, this is gonna sound really nitpicky, and it probably is, but their mark is played interface is real bad. One thing that I do all the time in Pocket Casts is select multiple episodes and mark them as played or archive them. That is nearly impossible in Spotify. It is rough. Also, changing your auto download settings so that you don't, use up all of your data or, download episodes you didn't want to download, use up storage you didn't mean to use. This is a really basic podcast app functionality, and Spotify just doesn't care about it. And this is something they've added recently, but it just drove me crazy that just getting episode notifications was something that took them a year to get done. These are basic things you need to launch an experience, and they seem to not care about some of them and seem to not prioritize the things that, I personally would prioritize were I running the show. Now I know that Spotify is not the only app to commit some of these UI crimes. One or two other apps don't support custom RSS feeds, and that sucks. They should do that. And Stitcher, I know, used to rehost audio, but they have stopped doing that, and they got a lot of flack for it for a long time. But the thing that really drives me nuts is that only Spotify is really intent on controlling the entire experience while not delivering an experience that's good enough for a lot of users. Spotify owns podcasting companies up and down what they call the stack. They own a podcast app, clearly, the Spotify app, but they also own a hosting app and a podcast creation app and an ad network. And they just bought an analytics company and another back-end service that I can't tell you off the top of my head what it does this week. They very clearly want to own the industry from top to bottom. And I don't think that's good. This stuff is the forever problem of walled gardens and good user experience. One way that you provide a good user experience is by keeping people in the ecosystem so that it's easier for you to iterate and provide revolutionary features. One of the problems with that strategy is that those walled gardens become inflexible. And when users have a single need that breaks what you as the product manager or the engineer or the designer expected of them, it can make the whole thing topple for that particular user. Now, this is a whole other video that I literally have already scripted maybe 5 or 6 times. So if you want that video, let me know in the comments. I will probably script it another time and get it out. Anyway, the worst thing that Spotify has done for the podcast listening experience is not even about ads or their app. It's exclusive podcasts. And that's because exclusive podcasts don't just apply to Spotify's own users. They reach out of that application and make a worse experience for everyone who listens to a podcast that they make exclusive. Now, again, I want to be clear. Other companies, other apps, other services have done exclusive podcasts, and they all suck. None of them should be doing them. I hate them. But there is a specific kind of exclusive podcast that sucks more than the others. And that's a podcast that used to be open via RSS, available on all of the apps if you wanted it to be, and then went exclusive. This is the reason I stopped listening to Love and Radio. They went exclusive to that app Luminary, and I got pretty angry about it. But I don't really care that much about a show that was always exclusive to Luminary or Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I mean, I don't love it, but it doesn't really bother me that much. I don't need to listen to Karamo's Luminary show because I was never listening to it anyway. And I really actually don't care about windowed shows. So these are shows that are on a platform for a time and then come to the open feed. So Marvel did this with the Wolverine series. They were windowed on Stitcher for 6 months. I'm making that number up, but there was a number of months that they were on Stitcher, and then they would go to the RSS feed. And I listened to them on the RSS feed, and the reason it didn't matter is because I didn't know when they were on Stitcher. I just let them come to me. That was a good experience for me. I didn't really miss out on anything. I think the only time that might matter is it was a really big hit show, and you were missing out on the conversation. But frankly, none of those have been big hit shows, so I don't know what that would look like. Those ones, they don't suck as much. They still suck, shouldn't be happening, but it's the shows that used to be open and went exclusive that I'm really mad about. And these kind of exclusive shows are why Spotify and Luminary drew so much ire. When Love and Radio went exclusive, Nick Vanderkolk, got a lot of crap, and I'm sorry he got a lot of crap, and I'm happy that he, got the money that he did. He deserves to be paid for the amazing stuff that he'd been putting out for years. But one, I already have a podcast app that I love. And 2, I'm not gonna stop using that app to fulfill some capitalist fantasy of owning an entire industry. I'm sorry, that's not gonna happen. I'm happy to pay the creator. I'd love to pay a creator. And I wanna be clear, I'm absolutely happy that paid podcasts exist. I just wish that I could pay a creator directly for a show and then listen to it wherever I want. And wherever I want absolutely can and should include Spotify. And often critics of my opinion point out that Netflix has exclusive shows, and I just don't think that that's a good comparison. In fact, I think that what happened with television and movies is actually kind of a warning sign. Like, it used to be that we had physical media that we could go put in any old box attached to any old screen and we could watch it. And now we're in this situation where if I want to watch a certain show, it's only in this app, which sometimes is not available on the box that I have because of disputes between these companies. And like, I've seen situations where there's certain things that I can only watch on like a Sony TV because that's the only place where they made the deal. And that's not good. Like, the way that we watch TV and movies now is not like okay. Like, it's fine, but it's not the best that it's ever been. It could be much better. It could be like podcasts. Like, imagine if someone told you that if you wanted to read their exclusive article, it was free, but you had to read it on the Microsoft Edge browser on Android. Like, that would not be okay. Like, a podcast being free to listen to on Spotify is not a gotcha for my complaints. I'm sorry. And this takes me back to Heavyweight because it's the latest in a very long line of Gimlet shows to go Spotify exclusive. Back in 2019, back when Spotify bought Gimlet and Anchor and another podcast network called Parcast, Gimlet co-founder Matt Lieber said, if you listen to Reply All and you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can continue to listen to Reply All on Apple Podcasts. The shows that are out there now are going to continue to be available everywhere. That, it turns out, was aspirational, or at least temporary. Clearly, someone else higher up made a decision that was different than Matt's. Or, I don't know what Matt's doing at Spotify these days, but maybe he made the decision himself. It would not surprise me. There are, from my count, only 2 shows, and if I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments, still distributing to non-Spotify podcast apps. Those are The Journal and Reply All. Reply All, if you don't know, is Gimlet's most popular podcast. And I really think it's just a matter of time before both of those shows go exclusive as well. And this is why Jeff Emtman tweeted what he did. Jeff seems to see what I do, which is Spotify tightening its grip on the industry and desiring to be the only place for podcasts, both now and in the future. This is something that threatens so much of the community of makers and listeners that's been built up around podcasts since 2003. And for what? Corporate dominance? The critics of Jeff's tweet were often podcast producers themselves, many of whom work at organizations or companies who made an exclusivity decision for them. And I want to say right here that harassing producers and hosts of shows is not the move. So if you were thinking about doing that, don't, you know better. Besides, these people have good reason to be upset. I just think that the anger is a little bit misplaced. Like, these folks are worried that if the backlash is big enough, that they might lose listeners. And if they lose listeners, it's very likely that they can lose their jobs. And losing listeners is something that happens to exclusive podcasts. We know that Joe Rogan, our favorite, lost a ton of his audience in the move to Spotify. What about those audiences that weren't that big to begin with? Well, The Besties, a podcast that's sort of in the McElroy world. It has 2 of the McElroy brothers and a couple of their friends from their time at Polygon talking about video games. And they did this show for a number of years. It stopped happening and it came back as a Spotify exclusive. And they said it really couldn't have come back without Spotify. It sounds like there was financial reasons that couldn't have happened, but the thing is, they couldn't keep the listenership high enough to stay on the platform or to make it financially viable for Spotify. Now, they're still doing the show and seemingly it's doing better. They've started taking ads, listenership, from what I can tell, seems to be going up. Of course, I don't see their analytics, but it seems like things are going well for them. Unlike these producers who work at Spotify or other organizations who made one of these exclusivity decisions, are right to be concerned about losing their jobs if listenership drops. Like, it's scary to have your livelihood dependent on a corporation intent on owning the entire podcast medium. I just think that criticizing your listeners for pointing out that that does in fact suck is probably misdirected. All of us, listeners, independent creators, the producers who work on these shows, should be directing our frustration at the people with power who make listener experiences worse and who threaten creators' livelihood. The anger, then, should be reserved for Spotify. So there's something I haven't told you about yet. And that's that Gen Z strongly prefers Spotify for listening to podcasts. There's this podcast hosting service called Transistor FM, and Sadie Jackson, the daughter of the co-founder of that service, Justin Jackson, found that 47% of Gen Z frequent podcast listeners preferred listening to podcasts on Spotify, and that's opposed to 24% of millennials and 17% of Gen X. If I had to hazard a guess, it's probably just because that's where these folks are spending their time, and then the podcasts are there, and so they listen to them there. Like, I don't think that's surprising, but it worries me because it implies a trend that could end in Spotify really owning podcasts in a way that crowds out any competition. And it's never good when one platform is completely dominant. I mean, look at YouTube. If you run a sex education channel and maybe you keep running into content moderation misunderstandings, like the folks over at What's the Safe Word, where are you gonna go and put your long form content where it will find an audience? Facebook? Maybe, but I don't really think that their content moderation policies or their algorithms are fit for that content either. Twitter doesn't let you upload something that big. Instagram's not built for it. Vimeo is not what you think it is, and it is not good at helping people find video. And TikTok's maybe YouTube's closest competitor, but it's fundamentally different in some very vital ways, and they themselves have already run afoul of sex education channels, as well as just queer creators in general, just like existing on the platform. Like, there is not another place to go for that kind of long form content. I don't think it's hard to extrapolate that if Spotify were to be the YouTube of podcasts, that would be bad for podcasts. I'm gonna say the thing, and it's gonna suck because I just went through that whole spiel, but speaking of YouTube, if you are here right now, please like the video because all of the reasons above. Weirdly, my first answer to all of these problems comes from Anchor, a Spotify-owned company. In April of 2021, the CEO of Anchor, Michael Mignano, I think we're gonna go with that. I think that's how it's pronounced. He wrote an essay about the limitations of RSS, and it scared a lot of people in the industry. He pointed out that RSS is good at distributing flat audio files, but it's not good at enabling paid podcasts. It can do it, but it's not great at it, or providing listening analytics to creators. Remember what we talked about earlier. He mentioned that at Anchor, they would be doing some things that went beyond RSS, but that their primary goal would be choice for creators. A few days later, Matt McDonald, then the VP of product at Acast, I think now he's the chief product officer at Acast. Acast is a company based in Sweden. They offer a podcast app, they offer a hosting service, an ad network. They're, one of those. They're just kind of a smaller offering. They're pretty big in Sweden though. Matt wrote what I saw, and I think what a lot of people in the industry saw, as a response to Michael Mignano. He called it an ode to RSS and a toast to the future. Matt's argument was that RSS should continue to be the basis of podcasting in the future, and any work done to make podcasts better should rely on it. He proposed something called dynamic RSS, but frankly, he was a little light on details for me. And while neither of these big old business boys really explained what they meant, I do agree with the sentiment of what they were saying. We need a technology that's as open as RSS, that is distributed in the way that RSS is distributed, not in the way that crypto coins are distributed, but also that enables dynamic data transfer. We need this to make podcasts easier to subscribe to pay for, to buy, and we need it to allow more dynamic listener experiences, like the stuff that I told you that Spotify's offering in their proprietary way. I don't much care if this thing is based on RSS or not. I'm not married to that technology. The thing that I care about is that podcasting stays as open as it's ever been. Sadie Jackson proposes one way we could save open podcasting is creators, meeting Gen Z where they are, building social influence on the social platforms where Gen Z spend their time, and marketing shows that are, available openly, or the idea of open podcasting in general. But the biggest thing that I think that we can do to keep power away from platforms, whether they're podcasts or not, or Spotify or not, is for creators to put our content everywhere it can be. If you're a short video creator, your stuff should be on TikTok and Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. I could probably be better at that one. If you're an independent podcaster, you should put your feed in all of the directories and re-upload to SoundCloud and be on YouTube. Don't let a single company own your relationship with your listeners. And that's what I'm gonna do. I told you at the beginning of the video that I had an announcement. And the announcement has actually changed a few times, and it's changing again. I keep learning new things and having to reshoot this part. I think this is the fourth time that I've done this, but I think I've nailed it. So if you look down in the description, you are gonna see 2 links, and these are podcast feeds. One is an audio podcast feed, one is a video podcast feed. I've talked about this a couple times in this video, but podcasts can be other things than audio, and many open podcast apps support video. And what this means is that you can get every video that I've published on this channel or will publish on this channel in the future in your podcast app, either as audio or as the full video. And look, I'll be honest, I don't think that listening to my videos is the best way to consume the things I make, but who am I to tell you what to do with your life? For what it's worth, a big podcast app that doesn't support video is Overcast. It just seems to be something that Marco Arment doesn't personally like. It will download the video files, but it'll just play the audio, so you might as well just use the audio feed. In any case, I just want to give you the choice to watch or listen to my videos wherever it is that you want to do that, because it doesn't matter to me where you watch or listen to those videos, as long as you enjoy them enough to come back here and like, comment, interact otherwise, so that more people have the chance to see them. And with that, I'm gonna give it back to my past self and hope that I don't have to get in front of the camera for this video again. I don't really have a desire to start a Patreon right now, but I am interested in the fact that they've talked recently about allowing video uploads on the platform. And if they ever do that, I may upload videos there as well, and not charge for them. You know, upload the same videos that I put here for free on Patreon for free. But right now I'm not doing that. I haven't started a Patreon, but just kind of giving you a vision into what I'm thinking. Now, the question. Will this be available on Spotify? And originally, due to a lot of the stuff that I talked about in this video, the answer was gonna be yes. Then last week, Jeff Emtman tweeted and then wrote a blog post about how he was pulling Here Be Monsters off of Spotify. And a lot of his reasoning resonated with me. I'll link the blog post below. I'm not gonna explain it all here, but suffice to say that this is not a situation where it's me being greedy and like trying to own something in a big way. It's just me making a personal decision about not wanting this particular content on that platform. And I don't think you're a bad person if you put your podcast on that platform. It's just that, you know, for this stuff, I'm not going to do it, but it'll be available wherever else you want it, including should be searchable in most podcast apps using these words. I'll put them right here. It's hard to see. I have to look at the camera because it doesn't matter to me where you watch or listen to my videos. Like, you might enjoy them more in that way. And the point is that you have the choice. Right here at the end, I want to thank Moody Hikmet for reading over an early version of the script. Your help was invaluable, and frankly, I couldn't have gotten through this one without you. I also want to just shout out some tweets from Brendan Bigley. They were extremely helpful. They are where I found all of that stuff about Gen Z preferring Spotify. Honestly, it kind of reshaped this entire video. So anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks for getting all the way through. I will see y'all next time.